everybody, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries. Today it is my privilege to interview Patrick Kadian, who is the Expat hypnotherapist. Now, Patrick is currently sitting in Thailand. Welcome, Patrick, and thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been so excited. I've been listening to your podcast, and I just finished your book. So I'm really
Oh my.
excited to talk to you. I will try not to interview you. I will let you interview me, but I've got questions too.
Excellent. We like that because it's in the spirit of the conversation that I think the essence is communicated to every pair of ears that are lent to this in the future. So thank you for being here. Just a little bit of information for you listeners, and that is that Patrick is a hypnotherapist, and he really enjoys, his favorite thing is to share practical exercises that we expats can use to better enjoy our adventures abroad, not only for oneself, but for your families. And so he has been an expat for about 30 years. He's been in 16 countries across 5 continents. And half of that time, he has moved with a wife and his family. Currently has 2 teenagers. So after working for years through the system of disaster relief and economic development, he has leaned into mental health training. And what a fabulous time to lean into mental health training. You're so smart, Patrick. Thank you for coming on the show today once more.
Thanks for having me.
So, we're going to talk about third culture kids today. Big
Yeah.
subject. And I would love to know, how would you define a third culture kid?
So, the way people tend to define it is that these are these kids who are used to living in kind of this liminal space, this space in between place. So sometimes people are like, I lived in Thailand, I lived in America, I lived in Ireland, I lived in Nigeria. Does that make me a four culture kid? But what it is, it's that you're not of the place that you tend to be living. You're not necessarily of the place from your parents are from, or where your passport says that you're from, but you're kind of in this blend, this in between. So that's how I think of a third culture kid.
Absolutely. And tell me, what are the differences? How does this differ from children who are nomadic, digital nomads children? Is there any difference in terms of the time space that is spent in a country?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about that before. I think so. When you're defining a digital nomad, are you thinking about kids that are spending maybe like a few months in one place and then it's like, hey, we're going off to somewhere else? That's a really interesting cadre of people that they're becoming more and more of. And I wonder myself about these kids, what kind of school system they're in and how that's working. So I don't know if I have a ready definition to say this, that you need to be in one place for a certain amount of time to be a third culture kid. The main thing that would define you as a third culture kid is that you were spending a significant amount of your formative years abroad. So I would think, yeah, and usually for like your parents' job or something. And I would think that digital nomad kids would fit under that, but that increase in mobility would seem to probably lend itself to potentially more issues depending on, what's going on in life.
Yes, yes. I asked that question because in my comunidad here in Mexico, we tend to see digital nomad families come and spend a number of months and then go to another destination. And also, we have a lot of nomads who listen in today to this podcast. So they may be wondering, what is the difference between the settled TCK and the mobile TCK?
So, I would probably fall back on some of the research that was done by TCK Training and by Tanya Crossman. I know that, have you had her on the show, Tanya?
We have recorded episodes, and the
Oh,
purpose of this is to be part of a TCK project. So I'm calling it the Third Culture Kid Project, and we will be issuing these all together so that there's a body of work.
great. Yeah, Tanya's work is really great,
It is.
that she's been doing, and it really helps to answer some of those questions because maybe I could answer it from this not a subjective point of view, everything is subjective, but from my own particular point of view. But she has gathered some of the data, and so it would seem to be the case that the more you move house, the more you move country, the more likely that you might be be experiencing more adverse childhood experiences.
Mm,
There seems to be a correlation that goes along with that, according to some of the studies that she had done. And so I'd really have to base my answer on that, thinking there's probably a chance that with that greater bit of rootlessness, which is, listen, my kids also, I keep them in a potted plant kids. I'm not saying that in a pejorative way. Um, that you might need to spend even more intention in making sure that you're putting fertilizer into their little potted plant to make sure that they're getting these positive childhood experiences that can
yes.
help balance some of these things out. So I
Yes. No
think that's,
matter where they are.
yeah, you know, um, and I think that's a new lifestyle, and I think it'd be interesting to see what happens over time, and how they themselves would answer that question.
And so, what are the most for traditional TCKs? Let's go back to the traditional TCK, who lives in a country perhaps 2 to 3 years and then changes school, changes language, changes continents. Um, what are their most significant challenges that they will be facing as they're growing up?
As they're growing up. It's hard to kind of group it all together about what the entire group would be because there's a lot that parents can put into it, and there's a lot of different variables that are going on. But it
Yes.
seems to me that in general, we can expect the kids to have less of a strong sense of identity and a sense of wanting to move, quite a bit of restlessness, of not being able to feel comfortable laying roots in one place,
Mm,
sometimes feeling a bit apart from wherever they are. Also, what it seems to be the case is that children, as they move around, sometimes they've got some of these big T traumas that are happening to them, if they've had a difficult transition. Um, but even as you move from one place to another in a rather organized transition, there could be these kind of little griefs that one has when the parents are also having a hard time, going through their adjustment. They might not be able to let the kids give voice. So what seems to happen is that some of these griefs can stack up and eventually become more of an issue later, feeling, some sense of trauma that they might not know where it comes from. That it
mm,
takes a little bit of work to be like, oh, well, maybe it did have something to do with leaving my best friend in Malawi, and then, um, my dog, who I really loved, I had to leave him in Tajikistan, and all these things that could be happening that combined that makes it difficult. And from my understanding, again, like going more towards the literature, I would say that it seems to be the case that a lot of this hits in like the late 20s, early 30s, as you enter that life stage where you're like, okay, I should be building my life. But, for the most part, kids report that they were happy with this kind of life. There's a variance.
yes. Yes.
But so, just to make sure that people aren't like, oh my God, what am I doing to my kids? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
by because there's so much that you get from it as well. But there are some difficulties that come about it. And the more that we as parents and caretakers are aware of that, the more we can prevent some issues or speak to some of those issues, or expect to see some of those issues during different transitions in their lives.
So you have used the words so far, ACEs,
Yeah.
trauma,
Mhm.
and difficulties. Can you elaborate a little bit on what is an ACE
Okay.
and how might that look, please?
So ACE scores, these are scores, these are adverse childhood experiences. And this isn't something that's solely focused on experiences that expat kids have. This is something that was done, I think it was done by Johns Hopkins. I'm trying to remember which who had done it initially. And it has tied these 10 different kinds of experiences that kids can have of adverse childhood experiences to some poor health outcomes. And some of these things we see, there are things like diabetes, things that you wouldn't normally expect from like adverse childhood experiences. Who thinks that, oh, you're going to have more prevalence of things like cancer or certain kinds of cancer, certain kinds of diabetes, increase promiscuity and drug
Mhm,
use, all these different things that seem are around these areas of coping. Other things that seem to be like once you have some high stress generally in your life as you're growing up, that might be having some physiological changes on you. So these studies that were done in the 90s, this foundational study has been used all over the world now to be able to get an idea of how kids in different situations are doing according to these ACE scores. And it seems to be the case, really, that, most of us, if we say most of us from an American perspective, have at least one ACE score. It becomes more and more of an issue once you hit the number four. Apparently, that's a magic number, and so you're
ah,
increasingly become increasingly more prone to some of these poor outcomes.
okay, so if you have 4 ACE scores or more, your probabilities increase. I
Mhm.
was very interested to what you said and what you said about miniature griefs because I
Yeah.
just had a revelation of my own. My first experience with repatriation was at 10 years old, and I did not move out of Scotland. I stayed in Scotland, but I had family came back from Burma who moved into my house, and I was traumatized when we moved. And so I'd like to just pick up on this experience of trauma when you're young. How, I know that it shows up way, way in different ways for every person, but can you speak a little bit about what that might feel like or look like that we're not conscious of? Because mostly we're not conscious of any of this, correct?
Yeah. So I'm starting to extend a little bit beyond what my expertise is, because
Okay.
actually, most of the time, if there's like a big T trauma that's occurring with people, and they have a tendency to dysregulate really easily, and sometimes people get trapped into these ideas, or when you bring them up, they become um, caught in that moment as if it were really happening. If you have a very serious trauma that you weren't able to process. And it's not really certain why some people can process some things really well and some people
Sure.
have a hard time. It's not really a character issue. It's just, how our bodies relate to it.
So you are a professional in the field of hypnotherapy using mindfulness techniques. What do you
Yes.
find are the most common techniques that you are recommending to people now?
I use hypnotherapy through an ACT lens, or acceptance and commitment training, or acceptance and commitment therapy lens. And so I end up using a lot of the tools that come with this. So one of them has to do with, how do you deal with these feelings? We don't really get to control our feelings. They appear. Feelings and emotions have existed before humans. And sometimes we can become really uncomfortable with the feeling and we want to run away from it, or we want to shout, or all these things. So there's one tool, and there's one tool that's it's called the acceptance tool, where you want to be able to sit with this emotion and you want to be able to examine it, not just for the sense of having examination, but as you sit with a particularly uncomfortable stimuli, your
Mm.
body can become more used to it.
Yes.
And an idea of, and you examine it and you engage your curious mind when your nervous system is trying to shoot you through the roof. Yeah, trying to say, this is a real threat, fight this bear. And so you sit with that for a while and you gain some sense of tolerance of it to be able to have some space. I
Mm.
sometimes tell people it's kind of like you want to be, hmm, this particular stimulus, that we get used to stimulus and that we tolerate stimulus, we can see in our everyday life. When we go and we visit someone who has a cat, you know it immediately. You smell it, all right? But
Yes.
doesn't really notice it
Mm.
because the owner loves this cat.
Mm.
And so it sits with this nasty stimulus for a while, and we become accustomed to it. Why? Not for just because we like the smell or we
Mm.
really think we want to have that, but we love the cat. We do it for a particular reason. We love that cat. So we use this acceptance tool to sit with this uncomfortable stimuli when you know why you want to do it.
Mm.
Yes. Just like the cat owner can become more accustomed to having this kind of smell, we can get accustomed to, hey, we want to do something hard. We want to be vulnerable. We want to do something difficult. We want to travel around the world. We want to go into a marketplace where we don't really speak the language that well. And, we might feel a little bit uncomfortable with people bumping against us, but we want to be able to engage in that culture. It's something that's important for us. So we're going to try to learn to sit with that feeling. So that's one thing that we do a lot, learning how to sit with an uncomfortable feeling and still choose to do what you want.
And is this something that parents can use or learn to do on their own, or do they need the support of a professional? And at what point would they call in a professional?
Well, I think at what point kind of comes up to the individual, what their
Tolerance,
resources
right?
look like, yeah, what their tolerance are, even what their awareness might be of what's
Yes,
going on with their kids. Um, Sometimes the least aware people are probably the people that should call me the quickest. But
yeah.
uh, first of all, can people do this themselves? Of course. You know,
Thank you.
I know my, of course. The answer is of course, and it depends. Just like if you're aware of it, there are these different exercises that you can do, like the one I just told you. And I have some recordings on my website that someone can listen to my voice go and talk about, what the acceptance tool is, and they can listen to it and be like, oh, I've got this uncomfortable feeling. Let me sit with it for a while. And we sit with it to try to figure out why, and try to figure out the reason. Why do we want to deal with that? There are ways of dealing with the thoughts that can also come as well, where you want to be able to get a bit of a distance from a thought. Not every thought needs to be engaged with. Not every thought that we have is brilliant. Um, and some of the thoughts, while they might be true, may not be helpful for you, to get to where you want to go. And so there's practice. So, but these things, Doreen, are exercises, right? These
Yes,
things like saying, you know, I want to be neurologically strong. So just as we go, and if we want to be strong, either, to look sexy for somebody, or if we want to be better at playing pickleball, or if we just want, better mobility in general, we can go through and we can do some of that strength training on a
yeah,
regular basis. Yeah. And it might not be clear to you that, like, when you're doing a curl, how that's going to help you, or if you're a soccer player, why it's important to no one can see me, to be doing kind of side moves, but it helps you in motion. So
yes,
are things, but the important thing to remember is not like, oh, you can sit and you'll do this acceptance tool and you're going to be neurologically strong and flexible. Just like you can't just do a few lifts and be like, oh, you know what? This bicep, it's awesome. And now it's strong. It takes practice, 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 and that's how you get stronger at it. You can do it yourself by looking at, there are some great resources called ACT Made Simple. There are things that are also geared towards parents. You know, there's a very popular woman who uses some of these tools and wrote a book called Good Inside. That's a great book to use these specific exercises that I would be talking about, and use it within this framework that I tend to look at. I would go and look at any kind of consumer facing acceptance and commitment training or acceptance and commitment
Okay.
therapy book, and you can read that, and you can also come to my website.
Excellent. That's excellent. And we will definitely put those and draw everyone's attention to those in the show notes. Because it really is, that's where the changes are affected, isn't it? Is actually taking the steps, doing the listening, and practicing it. How can parents support TCKs or their kids more when they're moving or in the middle of a large transition? I was very fortunate. I moved with my daughter 5 times before she was in preschool. Well, before she was in elementary school, and then had a relatively stable, the next 5 to 7 years was relatively stable. I'm wondering about if you can give any tips today that help parents who are, seemingly on the move and to help children.
This isn't new wisdom. Yeah,
No.
these are repackaged ideas. Sometimes they have new scientific basis for it, new studies. But this is often, uh, one of the schools I studied at, the founder of the school, is someone who is really into Stoicism. The original idea of Stoicism is very similar to this. I live here in Thailand, which is a Buddhist country, and a
Yes.
lot of the same kinds of ideas also exist within Buddhism. Some of these things also find their way expressed in different ways in other kinds of religious practice. So none of these things are really new, but it's just the framework in which we do these tried and true ways to be able to regulate. So a framework in terms of age, let me start from there. You can probably be doing regulation work with your kids all the time, and it's probably a really good idea,
From the day
um,
they're born, huh?
from the day they're born. So, and I don't know where I come down on it, and it might be because I did it in this different way, and maybe I'm not accepting that maybe I didn't do it the right way. But this idea of like letting your kids be Ferberized, have you ever heard that? Let them cry out. Um,
Oh,
which is
verbalize. I've never heard of that word.
so it's making a verb out of the man's name who came up with this. So his name was Ferber, Dr. Ferber, I believe, and I'm not even sure if it was a he, it could have been a she. Um, but that said that the kids will come and self-soothe, and you want to be able to give them opportunity to self-soothe. So when you see behavior that's coming from the kids, you'll know, hey, they're doing their job, they're doing the right thing for their particular developmental stage, and you can meet them where they are. If so I've got some teenagers. I'm not going to say call out specific things that they do, but sometimes, they'll be acting in a way that I can find to be really selfish, really self-centered. But then when that actually that's kind of their job right now, they're individuating, they're getting all of these things going on. Let me just kind of regulate myself there and realize that, you know, I have this tendency to want to time travel and say, oh, but if I give in right now and I help them regulate and I hear them now, then what are they going to do when they're 35 and their boss is telling them something? How are they going to? Well, Patrick, they're going to have a different brain at that point. They're
Yes.
going to be maturing. So to answer your question more succinctly, yeah, you can do this at all different parts and know at the different times in their life to be able to meet them where they are in their developmental stage, to be able to lend the prefrontal cortex so that they feel safe enough, so that they can feel safe enough within their body to be able to turn back to that green zone, to that zone of tolerance, to be able to be regulated. So your job, one of your big jobs, is to be able to see what you can do to help them regulate, get them to that resource place where then you can work out any problems that you're having.
So, what I hear you saying is the main job of a parent is to be fully present with your child, no matter where they are in their development. But it is critical to really be educated, engaged, and fully present for them. Correct?
You want to be their safe home base. Like if you ever had this concept, where you're going out and you're it, right? But there's a home base. Have you ever played a game like this? Where,
Yes.
okay, there's the place where you're, but you need to get to somewhere else, and there's a kid that's going to come get you, but you come back to that safe home base. This concept of being that safe home base where, you know, dad might not always give you, mom might not always give you exactly what you want,
Yeah.
but it'll be safe,
Yeah.
that you can feel your emotions
Yes.
and it's safe to feel them, and you can like dysregulate, and mom and dad will help you bring it back down. And this idea of a safe home base becomes more and more critical for the expat who changes base all the time, where all of their other life around them tends to shift.
Mm,
All of their community, which is so important for us as humans, particularly at different stages in our lives, but to
mm,
always be that secure home base. So yeah, and you can be a safe home base if you can regulate yourself and operate from that and not allow yourself as much as you can. Listen, we all make mistakes and repair is one of the big things too. If your kid comes screaming at you, to not scream back, to you being from a resourced place.
So basically, you're talking about fostering that sense of stability and connection with your child throughout their developmental years.
That connection's what we want as parents.
Yes.
That we really, really want that. We want that also just for ourselves because we want to be connected to people as we travel around. These kids are going to be those kids that are, going to be supporting you as you age as well. They're going to be always important people in your life. But in addition to that, that connection, you have a job, a real job as a parent to be able to keep your kids safe.
Mm,
You can't really control their actions. And that becomes more and more evident as they get older, right? But the connection allows you to have influence.
mm,
So being able to do that not only helps them regulate, but you have a wonderful parenting tool, which is influence that
mm,
doesn't evaporate like control does. It will get stronger and less, depending on where they are. But if you're that safe home base, they know everything can kind of go and you're going to be there and you're going to be there for them. No matter what else is going on, you're
mm.
going to be able to have influence so they're safe and you're able to guide them in a direction more effectively than if you tried to have control.
And what a wonderful message that is of reassurance for parents who are listening to this, that it's possible, and with consistency and application over time, you will develop that influence, which will guide your children not only in the present, but also in the future.
I love what you said about consistency as well, because that's really what I was getting to before. These
Yeah.
tools on yourself and this consistent, it will become easier and easier as your neurological biceps grow, as you become more psychologically flexible. And that connection, being able to connect with your kids, they'll also learn that you're safe more
Mm,
and more. And so if
mm.
you're consistent with that, even when you make mistakes, because trust me, I've certainly made a good amount of them. Um,
Me
uh,
too.
yeah, this is part of it, it's but and so learning how to be able to repair those things is also important.
One last question, really, on this subject, and that is, where does hypnosis fit into this game or this
Yeah.
situation?
That's the main question people have for me too, because hypnosis is so mystified in many ways.
Yes.
Um, but let me explain first what hypnosis really is and what it isn't. Hypnosis is certainly not this idea where I would take over somebody's mind. Hypnosis is really more akin to meditation and
Mhm.
to mindfulness in the sense that what you're doing largely with this is playing within your autonomic nervous system. Because we have two things that control the autonomic nervous system, which is part of or two states that dominate the autonomic nervous system. We all have this. This is it's the peripheral nervous system, and part of the peripheral nervous system, and it's either this parasympathetic or sympathetic response. Parasympathetic being that rest and digest, sympathetic being that fight or flight kind of response that we have. Yeah. And the interesting thing about this is the more you're able to relax somebody, the more you're able to calm someone. And really, if you look at this as a seesaw, and you push down on that parasympathetic response,
Mm,
then you can introduce all these different stressful ideas, but the sympathetic nervous system, this part of fight or flight that shuts down one's thinking, can't really activate as well. So this idea of getting into one's zone of tolerance is also getting into a place where you are calm and focused. And hypnosis is also that same thing, where you're getting into a calm but focused state. When the parasympathetic nervous system is really activated like that, and you're really calm, you have the ability to be able to get get more out of your mind. The
mm,
one of the major guys called Spiegel out of Stanford. He's a second generation hypnotherapist as well as many other things, but he talks about that this is activating also the salience network. So you're able to imagine things differently than
mm.
you normally would be able to. You can imagine yourself differently. You can imagine yourself floating on a cloud and have some of these experiences. So where this connection is partially, let's say you're really um, in a hypnotic state. We can say, some people would say it's not really a state, but it's just, the parasympathetic nervous system is really activated. And let's say we want to introduce you to some uncomfortable stimuli. Remember, we were talking before about
Yes.
some feelings that are uncomfortable. Well,
Mhm.
sometimes there's just whole ideas of things that are uncomfortable. And we can talk about that while you have that state, and you can think through, be like, oh, actually, that's not really that scary because your body isn't giving you all of these scary signals. And in that space, your body is able to understand that something is not as scary. So maybe you're going to be less reactive to it. Yeah. So we were talking before, is one of the things about looking at that zone. One of the elements is you want to not be as reactive. So if you're able to bring in a stressor for somebody while they're in that particular state, their body's going to learn that they don't need to react. It's like with Pavlov's dog, you know, the when it hears a bell, yeah, it salivates because it was getting fed this
Mhm.
this food. and then you ring the bell for a while and don't feed the dog, and it breaks this connection. The body doesn't say, hey, we need to salivate anymore. You can talk to the dog all the time saying, it doesn't make any sense that you're salivating from a bell. But
Correct.
but if you go through this exposure a lot to the stimuli, it will decouple. So some of the time we can be more activated to some particular ideas that aren't really scary, but your body sees it as scary. So let's say, again, this market, because for me that was an issue. Going into the market in where some of the smells were unusual, the language I had to use was not one that I really felt comfortable with. I had to bargain, and sometimes I can feel uncomfortable with that. So I have all these things coming up. So we can learn in hypnosis to be able to sit with that stimuli for a while and break
Mm.
that connection, have access to make you less reactive. So it's about being able to stay within that zone, that window of tolerance more easily without having to talk about, well, it's important, you really want to be able to go into that market, right? And, it's not really dangerous. You can talk to people as much as you want, just as you want to say, dog, this bell does not mean you're going to be fed. But so this is, so you don't need to salivate. So that's where it's one of those ways that you can become less reactive to some particular feelings. Another thing, Doreen, is, we were talking before that sometimes you want to be able to expose yourself to the smell of the cat urine because you love the cat, right? So
Yes.
partially with hypnosis, you can start to realize what's really important to me.
Mm.
And you can imagine that, actually, I can see myself going towards this thing that's important to me. And as I do so, and I don't feel all of those things happening with the parasympathetic nervous system, that I can suddenly become more and more close to that thing that I like. You'd be like, I really do want to do this. So then you're like, hey, I want to, let's say a classic example, quit smoking because I want to be healthy. I want to be able to do this. Um, it's important to me. You can talk about it all day long. But that feeling of like, oh, I'm never going to be able to enjoy hanging out with my friends again, kind of goes away. So you can feel that sense of values, things that you value being a little bit closer to you through hypnosis as well. So it drops in through all of these different areas. It helps you be able to deal sometimes with some of the uncomfortable thoughts that you might have, some of the
Mm.
uncomfortable emotions, be able to realize why you want to do certain things, and to be able to rehearse those actions that bring you closer to being able
Yes.
to your values. I don't know. Was that clear? Um,
Yes. I think so. I've one last
I
question
caught my own head.
related to this, and that is, you mentioned meditation. I was going to ask you about Buddhism and what it's like, living. I lived in a Buddhist country also in Japan, and Shintoism, of course. And so, um, what is the role of meditation? And do you recommend meditation?
Definitely. So the role of meditation is, okay, so we're looking at the zone of tolerance again, right?
I
And
love
so,
meditation.
yeah, I mean, meditation is great. We tend, Doreen, our bodies are not matched with our environment now.
Correct.
Okay, let's start from there, right? And
Yes.
we can see this as really evident with the obesity epidemic. When
Yes.
because our ancestors were designed like, it's rare for them to be able to come across some honey or to be able to come across a sweet potato, and they're supposed to just eat it down. And your body is set to say, "Hey, oh my God, that was a really good thing." But now, when we have a lot of that around,
Mm.
it ends up driving behavior that isn't very helpful for us. And we get fat and it becomes problematic. It's the same thing when it comes to all these different stimuli. And it's one of the reasons why it's a real problem for us as expats, is that we have a negative bias, a bias towards noticing the negative, because our
Mm.
bodies are designed or evolved, depending on how you see things. You know, if you're in the savannah and you hear a rustling in the bush, you want to think tiger, because those of us that think tiger survive, even if it's a bird. Yeah.
Yes.
And so we run away from it. And so we run away, and so it activates our parasympathetic. It gets us a little bit
Yes.
spiked out of the zone and gets us to be able to run. We don't have to think at that point. We're just running, yeah?
We're on the move.
And we're on the move. We got to get away from this tiger or the bird, whatever it is. But the thing is that in today's society, we have all of these different stimuli
Yes.
that we can automatically see as a threat
Mm.
because of our bias. A bias that is hardwired into us. So I'm getting to the answer to your question. So the point is that in general, we tend to be a bit more activated as a result,
Yes, more reactive.
more reactive. Exactly. We
Definitely.
pop
I,
out
I I
and
have
we're
noticed that over the decades. I've noticed that we're more reactive.
And of course, as expats or as nomads, we're going always into uncomfortable new stimuli. So
Sure.
what's going
Super
to happen
reactive.
with our body? We're going
Yeah.
to be like right at that edge a lot of the time, particularly at certain times in our transitions. So
Yep.
meditation, what it does is it kind of, in my opinion, right, brings your natural balance down, right? Remember, I was talking about that
Yes.
seesaw, sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
Mm.
Well, right now our balance is, for most of us, including me, we can
Mm.
see that that balance is probably tipped a bit more towards the sympathetic, the fight or flight, and
Mm.
being able to sit and bring and activate the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, be able to think things through a little bit more clearly. We can rebalance. So that's why it's a really good practice.
Yes.
And it also because it kind of puts us in a lower place. And it also reminds our body what it feels like to be relaxed and that it's
Yes.
safe.
And with the mind body connection, that allows us to put ourselves back in what I would call a nice neutral zone. And so
Exactly.
yes, I think that meditation, no matter what you call it, whether you call it prayer or meditation or, what, all the different ways that we access this, I think it's a superpower.
Well, when it comes to the difference between hypnosis and meditation is like
Yeah.
hypnosis is kind of like guiding you into meditation. And then, depending on what we had agreed about before, then I would guide you in a specific way, in a
Yeah.
particular therapeutic way. So that's kind of that difference between those two. But meditation in general is a great thing because of that rebalance that you're talking about.
Yes. Yes. Well, this has been such a vast episode in terms of you have explained to us what regulation is and dysregulation and the results of that. We've covered ACEs and trauma. We have talked about how we can be fully present for our children and how important that is. You told us about acceptance and commitment therapy and looking through that lens. And we will definitely point our listeners through the show notes in that direction so they can listen to some of your tapes and some of your recordings on that. And then we finally have ended up on a place of how we can engage our invisible powers. I call it our invisible suitcase of superpowers using meditation or hypnotherapy to soothe our autonomic nervous system and basically just be more balanced humans. Is that sort of an accurate summary of what we talked about?
Not only accurate, but I think it's a really good summary. I'm going to use some of it. Um, you know,
You go ahead. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Patrick. I think we might have to do this again sometime. Now, tell me, where can listeners find you? What is the easiest and simplest access point to connect to you?
So the easiest point to connect to me is to go to www.theexpathypnotherapist, all one word.com. And there, you can book an appointment just to chat with me for a little while. You can also just shoot, if you're not really ready to talk to somebody, because sometimes that can make you feel uncomfortable, you can just send me a message. Um,
Nice.
the there's that way. And check out some of the recordings. And also you can put in leaves on a stream. That's one of those things, or the acceptance tool. Also to find it for yourself. All of these different, because there's a lot of different people that work within this sphere. I tend to work with people who are expats, who are nomads. There are particular kinds of issues that I'd be able to connect and be able to keep a safe space with. But if you're also just interested in it, there's so many materials. Look for things about ACT. Look at um, uh, what is the name of that book? I was saying it before. Good
Good
Inside.
inside.
That was a fantastic book. There's the Whole Brain Child, another really good book. There's so many resources out there. But if you want to reach me, it's www.theexpathypnotherapist.com.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation today, Patrick. And we wish you the best of success and the best of influence with your clients and these families who come to you for some expertise in the subject. So, listeners, thank you for lending your ears to this today. And if you have found some value and some benefit from Nomadic Diaries, please give us a like, a listen, a comment. Any sort of response is deeply welcomed. And thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Doreen.